Continue with our discussion of means of knowledge. In fact, from this discussion on means of knowledge, I wanted to give you some idea about the main theories of means of knowledge. Basically, we study in philosophy, which means in Western philosophy, and so accordingly we discussed rationalism and empiricism. In fact, our discussion on rationalism and empiricism, that basic discussion should continue through Buddhist studies. So today, in the first part of the discussion, I will look at what we did last time and continue with that, and then I will be also looking at the means of knowledge according to Buddhism. So that we will look at separately. So now. After finishing these two discussions, then maybe next day or so, I will be going back to different ways of conducting Buddhist research. So what we are doing last week and this week in this discussion is basically get an idea about the means of knowledge according to Buddhism. Now basically, but for that as a basis, we look at means of knowledge in the Western philosophy. We already looked at the ideas of rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism is basically based on reason, and empiricism, experience. However, when we come to discuss means of knowledge, one aspect we could not pay our attention was this aspect of divine revelation and sacred text in India and in the West. Now, this is something common to both Western tradition and also in the Indian tradition. Now, in the Western tradition, we studied how pre-Socratic philosophers and then Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then, in fact, during that period, we can see that they were not very much relying on the divine revelation or anything. So in the ancient Greek philosophical tradition, God did not play an important role. However, subsequently Europe became Roman Catholic, and then from what we call in the European history Middle Ages, roughly from 5th century to 15th century, roughly about 1,000 years. 1,000 years, sometimes this period is called Dark Ages. Of course, there is differences of opinion about that. Generally, it is called Dark Period, Dark Ages. But what happened was, during these 1,000 years in Europe, there was a real influence of the church on aspects of knowledge. In other words, in Western tradition, the scientific knowledge has to wage really a huge war against this tradition to come up. I will talk to you about that aspect in my next discussion when we talk a little bit about the scientific knowledge and the scientific method. But today I would just like to you to pay your attention to this particular phenomenon. So in the West, the authority of divine revelation emerges as the main source of knowledge, superseding the other two sources of knowledge during the medieval period, roughly corresponding to the 10 centuries, 1,000 years, from 5th to 15th century. So interestingly, we can say that in Europe, in the philosophical thinking, initially it was more to rationalism and empiricism. However, divine word, revelation, the God's authority came subsequently, right? In some traditions, say for India, you can see this from the very beginning. But in the Western tradition, the religion started playing a very important role in knowledge subsequently, after initial 1,000 years. Now, if we consider Socrates lived around 4th and 5th centuries BCE, up to the 5th century, roughly we are talking about 1,000 years. So in European philosophical history, roughly about 1,000 years, there was not much about the concept of God or divine authority. But started coming from 5th century to 15th century, the situation was that knowledge was completely governed by the church. So anything that goes against the Bible or the church belief was not considered to be knowledge. Okay, that aspect I will talk to you again when I talk about the science. But so basically what happened was divine revelation, the word of God, God's authority became one very important thing. So the knowledge had to be in accordance with that. Now that is the situation of medieval Europe. So it is from that the modern period started with philosophers like René Descartes and also scientific writers like Francis Bacon and all these writers and scientists and philosophers. Now in one of his, Francis Bacon, one of the early writers on science, actually lived around 16th century in England. Francis Bacon in one of his books reports a very interesting story. This is about the medieval period. Now the story is in the medieval period, we don't know whether this story exactly happened in this way or not, but it kind of gives us an idea about the authority of the revealed, the textual tradition. So the story is that at one time among these clergymen, there was a problem about how many teeth are there in horse's mouth. Okay, so then, in a way, a pretty simple question: how many teeth are there in horse's mouth? Now, in order to find the answer, what they were doing was they were looking at all the text. They were, trying to find the answer to this question. So they were reading, but could not find an answer to this question. Then months went. People were reading all the ancient texts, but no answer. Among these clergymen, there was a young person who had become a member of the clergy recently, and then he did not know what is going on. And then he asked at some point, what are you venerable people doing? What is this huge problem? Then they said, there is a very serious problem, no answer in the text, and we are looking for an answer. Now when he heard this story, he burst into a big laughter. And he said, if you want to know how many teeth are there in horse's mouth, don't read the books. Just get a horse and open its mouth and count how many teeth are there. That is how you know how many teeth are there in horse's mouth. Now, this is a very interesting story, whether it actually happened or not. Interesting in the sense, now this young clergyman who was not very much experienced, he was really advocating what is considered to be empiricism, experience. Now, if you want to know something, you should base it on your experience. So you get a horse and open the mouth and count it. But on the other hand, people did not believe in such knowledge. People believed that all worthwhile knowledge is in the text. Now, texts have all worthwhile knowledge because texts are being revealed. What is the content of the text has been revealed by God. So you can see the authority of the text comes from the fact that it was a revealed literature. So from the revelation, right? So now this is the situation where you think that all worthwhile knowledge is in the books. And then books are revealed truths by God. So, that type of interpretation. Okay. Now, this was the situation in Europe, close to the 15th, and we have the coming up of science starting around 16th century. So, but up to that point, the religious truths were really the truths. So, when we come to know the story of science, I will tell you more about it. We can see how it happened. Now, when we go from Europe to India, of course, in the Indian history, in India, the Vedas mark the beginning of the religion and philosophy. Now, early beginning of Veda goes something like roughly 1,500 years before Christ, BCE, before Common Era. So, you can see actually in India, the religious literature started much before than ancient Greece. So, we are talking about the 15 centuries, 1,500 years roughly. It could be even more. So, but in India, Vedas go into that period, and Vedas mark the beginning of religion and philosophy. So, in the Vedas, you have things related to both religion and philosophy. Again, in which religion and philosophy intermingled. So, both religion and philosophy are there. What we see in the Vedas is the authority vested upon it by alleged divine revelation, Shruti. Now, the alleged divine revelation, the divine revelation is Shruti. This is what you have in Kalama Sutta when the Buddha says, Ma Anussavena. Don't go by Anushrava. Anushrava means actually basically the Shruti. Shruti means what is heard. What is heard means what is revealed to you by some external agency. That is what it means, Shruti. So, Savana is basically the Pali form of that. So, when Buddha addressed Kalamas, he said, Ma Anussavena, don't go by Anussava. So, Anussava means really the Shruti. So, they accepted Shruti to reveal to contain the real truth. So, therefore, we can see in both Indian and Western traditions, you see that divine revelation and the sacred text play in a very important role. Now, from that we come to the authority of the word of the Buddha. It is interesting to examine how Buddhism, being a non-theistic religion, the words of the Buddha were treated. What did the Buddha say on this issue? Now, in the Kalama Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya, and the Vimansaka Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya, are relevant in this context. Now, of course, how was the Buddhist tradition? How did the Buddhist tradition treat the word of the Buddha? Now, this is a very interesting question. Now, when the Buddha said that Ma Anussavena, don't go by the divine revelation. Now, we don't consider what the Buddha said to be divine revelation, right? Because Buddha is a human being, and then what the Buddha said is what the Buddha realized. Okay? So, we know that what the Buddha said is not something revealed by somebody else to the Buddha. So, it is Buddha's own knowledge. Okay? So, in that sense, Buddhism is not considered to be the revealed literature. But the important question is this. Although we know that Buddhism is not the revealed literature or revealed truth, okay, what the Buddhist discourses say is what the Buddha realized. Now, how are we, the disciples, people who come later, treating the word of the Buddha? Now, are we going to examine the word of the Buddha before we accept, or simply we accept what the Buddha says because Buddha says it? Now, again, it is very interesting. It is one thing Buddha said, but sort of another thing what the disciples did actually. Now, if you take Kalama Sutta, Kalama is very interesting. Buddha went to Kalamas. Now, Kalamas they admitted that they do not have accepted religious teacher. In other words, Kalamas were not followers of any particular religion. Okay? They were, in a way, we can say they were free people. They were not committed to any religion. And then therefore what happened was many religious people came and talked about their religious traditions. And then Kalamas noticed that practically everyone says what he says is true and the rest is false. Now any intelligent person can have a problem. How can this be? Basically we think that truth must be one. Of course, all the others must be false. Now, this is the general idea. I'm not saying that that is exactly correct. But basically, the peoples believe that in any particular case, truth is one. If one is the truth, it is understood that the rest is false. Now, this is the basic understanding. So, Kalamas were asking from the Buddha, how could this be? Everybody come and then they say what they say is true, what others say is false. Now, for a rational person, the question is, it could be that one of these people must be telling the truth. Then if one of these people were telling the truth, then others must be telling falsehood, right? And also there is a possibility that what everybody says can be false, right? Who knows? What everybody must be false, but what everybody saying cannot be true. Do you see the difference? What everybody says can be false. We don't know. But logically we can say that if truth is one, one of these people must be telling the truth, others must be false. Okay? Now this is the difference. So Kalamas asked this question from the Buddha. And then Buddha listed, I'm not going to discuss Kalama Sutta with you here. Buddha says, Ma anussavena, don't go by the tradition. Ma takka hetu, don't go by the logicality. And also, Ma samanono garu, don't go by the view that, this is your teacher. So in other words, there you have the tradition, then you have the logic, then you have the personal authority. These are the three different things that are basically treated in Kalama Sutta. So when Buddha says Ma anussavena, the first one is, we can say revealed truth, what is heard. Now the second is logic, or you can say logical character. Number three is, we can say, personal authority. Number three is personal authority. Now, personal authority is basically something like Ma samanono garu. This is my teacher. So you simply accept something because it is your teacher. Or you simply accept something because it is a recognized person, recognized authority. So, in the Kalama Sutta, Buddha says, don't go by these things. Having said that, Buddha says that how should you accept something? When Buddha says, Kalama, tumhe attanava janeyatha. Attanava janeyatha. When you know for yourself. Now, there is a very interesting question here. Now, can we know for ourselves everything that is in the world that we can know? We cannot. I mean, there are many things. Now, suppose you want to know about medicine, what do? Usually you go to a medical expert and talk, or you read medical text. Say you want to know about engineering, you cannot know it by yourself. You consult some person who know about engineering, you read some text. Now, which means that, we cannot know everything by ourselves. Right? Then we have to rely on the text. We have to read the text. Now, suppose some illness happens to you, then you go to a doctor. Usually you accept what the doctor says about you. Right? Which means that about your body, doctor may know better than you do. So when you go to a doctor, doctor says that, okay, you have this illness, but you did not know that. But then you accept it. How do you accept? Because you think the doctor is a good doctor. Apart from that, how do you know that? But sometimes, okay, we think that, okay, this doctor is not really reliable. Then what do? You go to another doctor. And then you consult another doctor, and then that doctor also say that, okay, you have this disease. Now two people saying, then what happens? You just accept it. But is that your personal knowledge? No. That knowledge comes from another person. So about that, about your body's health, doctor knows better than you. About this building structure, engineer knows better than you. So, in our day-to-day life, there are so many things we have to rely on other people. We have to rely on knowledgeable people. We ask a knowledgeable person and then we accept it. Then what? How do we know things by our own experience? Can we know everything by our own experience? Now, suppose you want to know about some remote country from here. Suppose you are going to go to some European country or something, and before that you want to know about that country. What do you do usually? You read some books. You go to internet, and then you Google, and then you get a lot of information, right? But then that is how you know. But the Google gives you information, books give you information. It is not your knowledge. It is not that you got all these things by your own experience. Now what I am trying to show you is, although Buddha says that kalamas to go by their own experience, actually Buddha was not talking about this general knowledge. We have to understand that very clearly. This attanava janeyatha method cannot be applicable to each and everything, okay? Many aspects of knowledge we come to know by others. Now I think the other day I referred to you in Buddhism, Buddha says that there are two things that are conducive or helpful for sammaditthi. Now what are these two things? Paratocha ghoso, yonisocha manasikaro. Now paratocha ghoso, parato ghosa. Parato ghosa means the sound of or the word of any other person. So para, the other person can be your teacher, or it can be something mentioned in the book. It can be anything. But parato ghosa, so you can see parato ghosa as the So when Buddha refers to this parato ghosa, Buddha accepts that we have to know certain things from other people. But then how do you think what Buddha says to kalamas? Buddha says to kalamas, don't go by the tradition, don't go by any of these things, don't go by your teacher, but when you know things for yourself, attanava janeyata. Now, don't you see some kind of discrepancy here? Some kind of, the problem here. Actually, when you think carefully, we have to know that Buddha was not referring to any kind of information about the world we are going to get. So there is a distinction here. It is not any kind of information about the world. It is not any kind of content of a particular subject. We can never be able to know those things by ourselves alone. Things are collected by other people. We read these things and we get knowledge. However, important thing is in Kalama Sutta, Buddha was not talking about physics or chemistry or history or geography or anything like that. Buddha was basically referring to kusala and akusala. What is good and what is bad. Now you see, this is a very different area of knowledge when you talk about what is kusala and what is akusala. Okay? Now what is kusala and what is akusala, Buddha says, when you know for yourself. So, kusala, akusala. Now we also have similar concepts, punya, papa. But punya, papa are different because, punya is considered to be the good deeds, papa are the bad deeds. So Buddhism, in the Buddhist tradition, we say these are punya, these are papa. But in other traditions, maybe they have different lists, what is good and what is bad. But kusala and akusala is different. Okay, kusala and akusala. Kusala means what is, basically we have a definition for kusala, right? Kusala is something without lobha, dosa, moha. Akusala is anything with lobha, dosa, moha. But punya and papa are little different from that. So we don't take that. But in Kalama Sutta, Buddha was talking to Kalamas, not about the world or anything, any world, any subject related to information about the world, but Buddha was talking about the kusala and akusala. Right? Even in the kusala and akusala, in this thing, Buddha says that you have to have your own attanava jnaneyatha. But then even on kusala and akusala we can ask, can everybody know? Can each and every person know for himself or herself? Kusala and akusala. Okay, we know that about any subject we cannot know, we have to rely on parato gosa. But what about kusala and akusala? Can everybody know what kusala and akusala is? What do you think? Can everybody know what is kusala and akusala? Can small children know what is kusala and akusala? No. Can people who have not thought about things much know about kusala and akusala? Now, even there, there seems to be some kind of limitation, right? Buddha says to Kalamas, okay, Kalamas, yada tumhe jnaneyatha. Attanava jnaneyatha. Kalamas, when you know for yourself, this is kusala, this is akusala. But on the other hand, we know that everybody cannot know kusala and akusala. Then what? Then what? Is the Buddha giving this freedom to each and every person, like 3-year-old child, to know what is kusala and akusala? Attanava jnaneyatha. Now, again, you can see we have to understand this Buddha's position very carefully. Now, Buddha was addressing the Kalamas. Kalamas were very mature group of people, and they were rational, intelligent people. Okay? Now, Buddha was telling about this only to this type of people, not to anybody and everybody. Okay? Now, in the text we have this concept. Vinyu Purisa. Now, who is Vinyu Purisa? Who is the Vinyu Purisa? Buddha always talks about Vinyu Puriso. Vinyu Purisa is a knowledgeable person. Person with a mature person. Person with the knowledge. Vinyu. Vinyu comes from Vijanati. So, knowledgeable people. I mean, Buddha talks to Vinyu Purisa. Buddha gives this Kalama Sutta to a group of Vinyu Purisa. So therefore, what the Buddha says in the Kalama Sutta is applicable basically to not to each and every person but to Vinyu Purisa. Okay? Now you can see, although Kalama says in the Kalama Sutta, we can simply read Manusavena, Ma Parampara and so on and so forth. But when you really study this sutta deeply, you can see that Buddha was, number one, Buddha was not talking about any kind of information or any kind of science about the world. It is understood that those things we have to get from the teachers and get from the books. However, it is possible that what the teacher can be false. It is possible that what the books say can be false. But initially we can't do much. We have to first learn these things from the teachers, from the books. Even though some of these things can be false, we don't know perhaps. But still there is no any other way to do that. Okay, that is one aspect. The other aspect is Buddha was talking to a group of Vinyu Purisa, so only Vinyu Purisa, not anybody and everybody can decide what is kusala and nakusala. When you think about very small children, they can't. But even when you think about the adults, grown-up people, but if they are not Vinyu Purisa, then they can't know. Right? Even if people are advanced in age, they are not small children. But that doesn't mean that even those people can know what is kusala and what is akusala. They have to be Vinyu Purisa, not ordinary Purisas, but Vinyu Purisa. Now you see, when you try to understand the Kalama, what the Buddha said to Kalamas, you have to keep these two things in your mind. Okay. Now for a Vinyu Purisa, should be able to see what is kusala in that sense and what is akusala. So these are the limitations you have to keep in mind when you think about the Kalamas. However, another important thing is, now Kalama Sutta was taught by the Buddha to Kalamas who did not have any particular religious affiliation. Right? I mean, they were not committed to any particular religious affiliation, right? So that's okay. But then what about the Buddha's own disciples who are within the Sasana? Can they examine the Buddha, examine the Dhamma, examine the Sangha? Can they do that? Now, what is the limitation? Like, okay, Buddha said to Kalamas. Now, Buddha said to Kalamas, don't accept simply something, Masamano no Guru, this Sramana is my teacher. But what about the Buddha? Should we apply the same criterion to the Buddha? Now, this again is another interesting question. Now, that's why I referred to Vimansaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Now, Vimansaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya is basically taught not to the group of people like Kalamas, but to Buddha's own disciples. Then Buddha says that even for these people, something similar to what the Buddha said to Kalamas, Buddha said, they should really do samannesana. The word used is the word samannesana, examination, comprehensive examination to know whether Buddha is really the Samma Sambuddha, whether the Buddha is fully enlightened one, whether the Buddha has these qualities that people talk about him, whether he has any akusalas, whether he has any bad or unacceptable behaviors. Now, Buddha says in the Vimansaka Sutta to his own disciples that they should examine the Buddha. Now, I think this is something very important, because Vimansaka Sutta is meant not for a group of people like Kalamas, who did not have any particular religious affiliation. But Vimansaka Sutta is meant for Buddha's own disciples. Okay? So Buddha says that, they should really examine, do a samannesana, sang anu esana, do an examination about the Buddha. So now, this authority of the word to the Buddha is something very interesting. However, this is what the Buddha said. This is what the Buddha said. But this is not what we are doing. Okay? Now, we simply in the Buddhist tradition, we accept what the Buddha say. Usually people don't go by examination or anything like that. Actually, subsequently in the Buddhist tradition, we had the concept called Bhagavat Pramana. Bhagavat Pramana. This concept means that we have the Buddha as the means of knowledge. Now, Pramana is the means of knowledge. Pramana Shastra is the scientific or methodical study of means of knowledge. So, in the Buddhist tradition, we had this concept, Bhagavat Pramana, Buddha as the Pramana. That means if the Buddha says something, we accept that to be true. Now, this is something very interesting. On the one hand, we have what the Buddha said about his own words. On the other hand, we have what we as followers of the Buddha are doing. Now, in the tradition, we started believing Buddha knows everything. Buddha is Sabbajñu or Sarvajña. Now, accordingly, we started believing that what the Buddha says is the truth. So we don't question. Now, there are two different things. On the one hand, Buddha says in the Vimamsaka Sutta, we have to examine. We have to do samannesana. But on the other hand, in the tradition, in the traditional mentality, if you didn't get this word, I will write it here. Samannesana. San Anu Esana. Esana means to look for, to investigate. So samannesana. So Buddha says that we need to do samannesana. But however, subsequently we develop something called Bhagavat Pramana. Right? So there appears to be some kind of discrepancy. The difference here. On the one hand, this is what the Buddha says. But on the other hand, tradition develop, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but basically tradition develop a mentality to accept everything that is Buddha said. Now in the Pali discourses itself, we have statements like Nahang Janami, Bhagava Janati. Nahang Janami, I do not know. Bhagava Janati, the Buddha knows. So the idea was that I don't know, but the Buddha knows. So if Buddha says this, I accept. Now that's a kind of surrendering your whole rational faculty to the Buddha. So if Buddha says, it is true. Now, we can do a long discussion about this, the role played by the Saddha. I will look at it maybe again a little bit later. But basically, I want to highlight to you the difference between the two. Now, this particular statement, just I wrote that is so beautiful. Tapat chedat cha nikashah swarnamiva panditai pariksha bhikshavo grahyah madvachona tu gauravat. Pariksha bhikshavo grahyah. Bhikshavo pariksha grahyah. Bhikshavo monks pariksha grahyah. You should take, having examined pariksha grahyah madvacho, my word, you should take by examining natu gauravat, not by respect, not out of respect. So you should not accept my word out of respect. Tapat chedat cha nikasha swarnamiva panditai. Now intelligent people test gold by tapat, by heating it. Chedat, by beating it. So by heating and by beating you test whether a piece of gold is a genuine gold. But in order to test whether the piece of gold is genuine gold, you have to heat it and you have to beat it. Now, similarly, pariksha bhikshavo grahyak madvachona tu gauravat. Monks accept my word, having examined, but not out of sense of respect towards me. Now, this is the ideal. But although this is the ideal, what really happened in the tradition is different. The tradition did not develop very much a critical mentality towards what the Buddha said. Before winding up this part of the discussion, I will give you an example. Now, when the Buddha in the Upali Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, if you read carefully, you see that in the Upali Sutta, Upali was sent by Jaina followers in order to have argument with the Buddha and win over. However, the total opposite happened. Upali was convinced about what the Buddha said. Now, when Upali accepted what the Buddha said, and when Upali wanted to take refuge in the Buddha Dhamma and the Sangha, Buddha said, Upali, don't do that right away. You are a very well-known person. People like you who are well-known, when you do things, you must be careful. You must examine more. Okay, now Buddha is kind of discouraging this man who is trying to take refuge in him. But what did happen? Did Upali go to examine what the Buddha said? Actually, no. You know what he said? He said, I am more pleased with you with these words. Now you see what the Buddha said really worked in the other way around. Buddha asked Upali to don't make a hasty decision, you think about it. But did that make Upali to think? No. Buddha said that I am now even more pleased with you. So this is how usually the tradition could work. So on the one hand you see that Buddha saying something, but on the other hand you see that how it is being how it is being affected or influenced to the people. So what I am trying to tell you is this: when you look at the authority of the word of the Buddha, this is a very fascinating subject. What the Buddha said on the one hand, how the tradition treated about what the Buddha said on the other hand. Okay, it looks like we have two different ways of looking at this. So this is something interesting for us to keep on thinking. Okay, now this is basically what the Buddha said, but I would like to talk about a little bit again, going back to our discussion on rationalism and empiricism in European tradition, with reference to Immanuel Kant. In fact, this is just to complete my discussion on rationalism and empiricism, for you to get confused. What I did was I talked about rationalism and empiricism, and then we talked about the divine revelation in the Western tradition and the Indian tradition, and then I talked about the authority of the word, how we accept the Buddha's word. Now again, to complete this story I started about means of knowledge in the Western tradition, we talked about the rationalism and empiricism. Ultimately, neither rationalism nor empiricism has adherents today in these classical senses. In these classical senses means rationalism in the sense Plato held it, or rationalism in the sense René Descartes held it. Okay. Now this concept of what we called innate ideas, that we are born with certain ideas, like this German philosopher Leibniz had in his mind. And then John Locke, empiricist, said that our mind is like tabula rasa, empty white sheet or something, not written anything. But again, people don't believe that our minds are like this, that empty when we are born. So both these traditional rationalism and empiricism do not have adherents today. The modern view has been greatly influenced by Immanuel Kant, 18th century German philosopher, who combined rationalism and empiricism as producing concepts and percepts. Neither can be meaningful in absence of the other. Now, Immanuel Kant, again, I am just giving you a very, very brief account, because we really need to study much more about him. But just to complete this story, Immanuel Kant said that we get percepts. Percepts means our experience. We get percepts. Percepts we get through experience. And then he said we get concepts. Concepts we get through our mind, or through, say, thinking. We get concepts. He said that ultimately for real perceptual knowledge to take place, these two things have to be combined. Now, how does the perceptual knowledge? Now, he said that when we say look at something, we always understand that what we see through the concepts of space and time, right? Now, when we see something, we see it in a particular space and also belonging to particular time. Kala and Akasa. Now, Kala and Akasa are considered to be Panyattis, according to Abhidhamma. Panyatti means Prajnapti, That means something that we have accepted and adopted, but doesn't exist really. Now, if you think about the kala, or if you think about the akasa, space, those things are not solid objects that exist. But our understanding goes around these concepts. So whenever we see something, we hear something, whatever that comes to our perception, we understand these things through things like categories like space, time, and so on. Now, space and time. There are other categories also, but where do we get these things? Do we get these things from our percepts or our experience? How do we get this? Now, Kant said that we get perceptions through this sensory perception. However, concepts we get through thinking. Now, he said something famously. He famously said, concepts without percepts are empty. Percepts without concepts are blind. Now, that is something very interesting to remember. Now, if we talk about the percepts means things we see. He said, percepts without concepts. Now, if you don't have concept like space and time, percepts don't make sense. But on the other hand, if you have only concepts like space and time without percepts, they are empty. Because, those things become meaningful only in the context of some perceptions. In other words, what Kant said is concepts and percepts have to go together in order to make it completely meaningful. Okay? In order to make it completely meaningful. So he said, he combined. Now actually these percepts belong to empiricism. Concepts belong to rationalism. So what Immanuel Kant did was really combine empiricism and rationalism in the history of Western philosophy, and then having combined these two things, he made ultimately both empiricism and rationalism to be meaningful mutually in the context of each other. In other words, you cannot really talk about meaningfully only as a rationalism. You cannot talk about meaningfully about knowledge production only from empiricism. It has to be combined. So in other words, we have to get information from our senses. But that information has to be put in order from the concepts we get in our mind. Okay? So the things we have to get from outside. So in other words, what Kant says is, yes, we get knowledge from experience. We get information from experience. But it doesn't become proper knowledge unless we have concepts we attribute to them from our understanding. Okay? So, this is basically what Kant did. And then he, who combined rationalism and empiricism as producing concepts and percepts. Okay, why don't we stop for a little while and take a short break, and then we will come and then we will, if you have any questions about this thing, we can discuss these things, and then, okay, we will take a 5 minutes break. Okay.